you've been talking about the autocracy model. Could you define that for us?
Sure. I mean, I try to use the state level autocracies that we've been seeing. And this one book I've written is called Laboratories of Autocracy. And I think it's a real preview of what's going to happen in the national level on the current path. You know, what's happened in these states is they basically locked out the voters, essentially through gerrymandering, but also through stripping powers away from courts, changing the way we elect or select courts, the types of stuff we're seeing in North Carolina. The people are kind of cut out of governing these states at this point. We're living this in Ohio, where I'm sitting. And what I've tried to describe in these books is that once that happens, the aim of government, honestly, is no longer about public service at all. It's about using government to serve certain private interests. And the public, because of the gerrymandering or the other mechanisms that lock them out, really can't stop it. And that's what we've seen in Ohio. And, you know, this is not rocket science. Academics a lot smarter than I am have written about this for years. But what I can do is describe what it looks like on the ground in Ohio. And what we've seen in the last 15 or 20 years in states where they've locked up these state houses and created a sense that the people can't stop anything is we've seen sort of this broad corruption of government to simply be about serving private interests. You know, one of the best examples is in states like Ohio. You know, they're giving away the farm, public school dollars to for-profit, you know, private school models, be it charter schools, be it vouchers. We've seen, you know, the takeover of utility commissions to serve the utilities and not the consumers. On and on and on again. It's this broader corruption of public service for private interests. And so when I see that happen here, and I see this new Doge or whatever it's called, where Musk is going to run it with Vivek Ramaswamy, it's going to be the same thing. We are about to see, you know, the federal government put to work for certain private interests, and if as best as they can, they're going to want to keep the people from stopping it. So the autocracy model very quickly in states like Ohio has led to corruption and has led to rapidly declining public outcomes. And my worry is that's exactly what we're going to see at the national level, and it's what countries like Hungary and Russia have seen as well.
Let me run a thesis by you and get your take on it. Government always serves somebody. It always serves principally one group. And the way that our government was established in the beginning and the way that it has rebooted itself, you know, post-Civil War, post-Republican Great Depression, is that we decided that government would serve the majority of the people, in a big way, the bottom 90%. Not screwing the top 10%, but, you know, serving the bottom 90%. And then came the Reagan Revolution, where Reagan is squealing that, you know, you're serving people who don't deserve to be served, you know, welfare queens, and that young buck standing in front of you in line at the supermarket is buying beer with his food stamps. And so America shifted and said, oh, well, I guess we shouldn't be serving the bottom 90%. Maybe we should do what the Republicans say, and maybe they'll let us have some of that wealth as we shift to the top 10% or the top 1%. And so, you know, then Republicans shifted government so that it's serving the top 1%. I would say it's not serving the top 10%. The top 10% pay most of the taxes. You know, the doctor, I have a friend who's a surgeon who makes around $550,000 a year, and he's paying 46% of his total income in taxes. So, I mean, it's like that. That's not happening if you're making $1 billion, $1 million a year. So we've seen this shift in government where it's now serving the top 1/10 of 1%. And now people are screwed, and they're going, what happened? What happened? And Trump comes along and says, oh, yeah, government is screwing you. I'll save you. And, of course, he's lying through his teeth. But it seems like these shifts are occurring in like 40-year cycles. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I mean, in all the attacks on democracy that we're seeing in states, and I think we'll see federally, are to keep the everyday citizen from being able to stop it. You're not, you know, in Ohio, you're no longer being served by your government, Ohioans. It's serving a very narrow group. That's where the benefit goes of dollars to, let's say, you know, educate. It's going to for-profit companies more and more, other states as well. And when you carve up the state so people don't have a say, it keeps us from able to stop. You know, you mentioned I'll reference another book, and I love that you're always reading books. I always go back to this book. Maybe it's hard to see. FDR and Democracy. You go back and read his speeches in the 30s. He was describing exactly. I always go through and read this book because it's both amazing how similar things were, but it's also really instructive that by calling it out bluntly in the way you just did, over and over and over, he won over the American people against the very forces you're talking about. So it is a pattern, and we've seen it recur again and again. And the truth is, if you cut the people out, that's who takes over, the very privileged, the very elite, the oligarchs. But when someone, and Trump did it this time, unfortunately, but it shows you that a Democrat can do it too. If someone comes along and calls it out as clearly as FDR did, he was giving speeches in front of Congress that were so blunt about this. Yep. And 6 months or a year later, he was winning 49 out of 50 states because the people saw it. And I do think it's on Democrats to go back and read who were the most effective at calling out the dynamic we're talking about. And when they had it, when they nailed it, the people responded. And I read these speeches, and as much as I admire a lot of politicians who are out there today, I don't hear a lot of people who put it as bluntly as FDR did back in the day. And it really showed that when the people heard it clearly, they saw it, they responded.
Yeah, I completely agree. And another thesis I'd like to get your take on. Joe Biden was the first president since Jimmy Carter to repudiate neoliberalism, not to embrace, free trade, billionaires and corporations, and basically an anti-union environment. He aggressively went against neoliberalism. Had Joe Biden been an effective communicator, and he's not. He's got a stutter, but he also seems to believe that the legacy media will do his job for him, the way they did in the 50s and 60s and 70s when he was. Had he been an effective communicator, had he been out there 3-4 days a week like Donald Trump was throughout his presidency, talking to the media, talking to the American people, using that kind of blunt language, which he did occasionally use, he could have broken through. And Donald Trump would not be president right now. And I lay in a lot of the blame for that, not just at Joe Biden's feet, but at the feet of Jamie Harrison and the DNC. And it's one of the reasons why I'm endorsing Ben Wickler to run the DNC for their election in February. Now, you've been the chairman of the Democratic Party in the state of Ohio. I'm curious your thoughts on the thesis and on my endorsement.
It's funny you mentioned that thesis. You and I think a lot alike, even though we generally only talk on these shows. I completely agree. I mean, there was a major communications miss here. By the way, I'm a fan of Ben Wickler. I'm also a big fan of Ken Martin. I think he's a very good chair. Ken Martin's a good guy, too. So short of that, and those are both would do a great job. But on your thesis, I just think Joe Biden, for whatever reason, was unable to sell his work. Yeah. He would sell it at the State of the Union well, and then we wouldn't hear on the ground in states like Ohio much for months. Yep. The lieutenant governor of Ohio, Republican, takes more credit for the things that Democrats did out of Washington than Democrats ever did. That's who we hear about. And so I do think that the inability to translate a broader vision, progress, success was lethal. And I think by the time we got to the election, what the election was essentially an unpopular incumbent who had failed to sell a package that was actually not a bad package to sell. And I think back to the way that Obama campaigned or Clinton campaigned, where, like you said, they were there every day. They were out there. They could sell it every single day. I do think that lack of a daily pitch being made about what had happened and what was being done really was a failure. And I think it speaks to not just the party, but like the communications channels. Yeah. The assumption that it's just going to get covered versus the media showing up in that small town and making the case.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's also, I mean, it also points to how our media has changed and how, frankly, the Democrats haven't changed with it. And you will see starting on January 20th, you're going to start seeing Donald Trump every single day out there talking about what he's doing, like he did for 4 years before. The thing that astonished me, David, is the post-election polling found that 56% of Americans, 87% of Republicans thought the United States was in a recession on Election Day. And when voters think the country's in a recession, the party in power always loses the election, virtually 100% of the time. And not only were we not in a recession, we had a better jobs market than since 1965. I mean, we had low unemployment, low inflation, the whole thing. But the majority of Americans, and that's not just a failure of the media, although it's a terrible failure of the media, it's also a failure of the administration to communicate.
I agree. You have to be out there. It has to be aggressive, or you, especially in today's world of disinformation and targeted social media, everything. If you're not out there aggressively pitching what you are doing every single day, you're just not going to get your message through. And I do think they went in with certain old assumptions that just are too dated to succeed with.
Yeah, they just figured that, you know, Chet Huntley and David Brinkley and Walter Cronkite were going to tell the country what's going on, and those guys are long gone. The great David Pepper, his books, Saving Democracy, A User's Manual for Every American, and previously Laboratories of Autocracy. Some great stuff. Check him out, davidpepper.substack.com. David, thank you so much.
Thanks. Take care.
My pleasure. Always great talking to you. We'll be right back.